uh, curious people really want to take a good look at this human life. Like, without anyone between them and this life, you know, without somebody mediating that experience, but rather to just take a direct look for themselves. And we can see, like, just how wonderfully practical meditation practice is, because there really is just sitting down and looking closely at our life appearing as it does. It's very direct. There's nothing, no circuitous route of study that needs to be taken in order to prepare for that. In meditation or in dharma practice, you really dive straight in the first time that you sit. But of course, since the time of the Buddha, the traditions have grown and spread through many different ages of the world and cultures of the world. And of course here we have this curious blend of traditions that come together, different people who've studied in different, usually Eastern-based originally traditions, and more American secular traditions, all coming together with a little different frequency, but all transmitting the truth, the dharma, the way for people to really look into their own lives and to be able to find positive transformation. Positive transformation in again, like I was saying at the beginning, we're in the reduction of dukkha, or dissatisfactoriness or suffering business. It turns out, you know, the Buddha was remarkably adept at being able to examine and unpack and understand the human condition, and then tailor practices and teachings in order to be able to confront it and to be able to transform the more negative aspects into more positive expression. That's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing in sitting. We're looking into the way that we distort or misunderstand the world and our life, and find a way to course correct. And that course correction is wonderfully is about returning to who and what we already are in our essence. It's not learning something new, but rather rediscovering something innate. And that's how you know you can trust it, because it's always been yours. It was always there. It isn't something that comes from somebody else. And so through these different traditions, we find our way and our affinity. It's for those who practice and you end up studying with a teacher or a particular tradition. There's some affinity there, something that really lands for you, where what is said and what is shared really seems to fit well. Each of us is kind of involved in that process, and fortunately, you know, again at Long Beach Meditation, we've got so many different traditions and ways that usually we can find some affinity there. My own practice has been almost completely in the Zen school, and then later maybe some study in the dancer and some of the more non-dual centric schools, but certainly like a deep grounding in Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism had its so-called golden age, right? In the Tang dynasty, mostly in the Tang dynasty and early Song dynasty in China. So somewhere like kind of 9th century China is where most of the classic teachings are gleaned from. And then from there, from Zen in China, making its way through Japan into the United States is the lineage through which I come down through. Tim, who will be here next week, also a Zen teacher. but that's come down through China, but then through Korea rather than Japan, through the Kwanum School and through Sung San and other teachers. And then our other teachers, you know, teachings of Vipassana and Theravada, Tibetan, different ways. The Zen school really has two predominant flavors to it. And I was going to talk about the one I don't talk about often today, which is more of the Rinzai approach. In Zen, the two predominant schools are the two surviving schools of the Rinzai school and the Soto school. Maizumi Roshi, who founded the Yokoji Zen Center, where we've held many retreats, he was given authorization to teach in both the Soto school and the Rinzai school, so it's quite rare in that regard. His father was a Soto teacher. He also was sent to study with a Soto teacher, received transmission from both, and then he was also sent to study with a Rinzai teacher, and then achieved transmission. Transmission is permission to teach. And approval, you know, in Japanese Zen, more than permission to teach, but approval of one's understanding. So there's an approval of one's understanding that's called transmission, and it's an important aspect of in the Zen tradition. It said the first transmission took place with this old guy here, the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. It said that when he was looking for a successor, you know, thinking about stepping back, reaching a real elder age, although he kept teaching right up to the end. It said in the Zen tradition that when he was looking for a successor, he was there to give a talk, and there were a lot of people, a lot of monks there to hear him talk, and he held up a single flower. So that he held up a single flower, and then just didn't add anything else, just sat holding a single flower. And it said after a short time, about a third of the people got up and left. or something like that, right? They came for a talk. What's going on? The guy's holding up a flower. That's nice. He's been doing it a while. He's getting a bit old. Is there something wrong with him? But it said that as he held up this flower, that Mahakasyapa, who was a student of his, although of a greater age than the Buddha, it said that Mahakasyapa alone of the assembly smiled at the raised flower. And at that point, the Buddha gave Mahakasyapa transmission and said that he would be the teacher after the Buddha. You know, and the simple... The simple response of seeing a beautiful flower being raised and smiling secured the transmission, while maybe 100 monks and nuns or more are trying to work out, what's he mean? What's the meaning? What does that mean, raising a flower? Like, I'm not getting it, right? And so later in the Zen tradition, these two flavors came into being through what would come down to be known now as the Soto and the Rinzai schools of Buddhism. Soto is very much grounded in Master Dogen and others, for those who are not sort of initiated into all of that. Often I'll talk about teachings from Dogen. The way of just sitting. You know, when I talk about meditation and speak to meditation, usually looking through the lens of, or lack thereof, of just sitting meditation. Just sitting, nothing else. No goal to be achieved. Nothing to be realized or attained. But taking root and sitting in a place of great faith that we are all originally awake and complete as we are. That like radical approach that welcomes this as it is and says there is nothing to attain, nowhere to go, no way to improve, but a deep swallowing down of this one here as one is. And broader than that, you know, the greater self, the world and all people, just as they are, just as it is. and being able to sit as that, right? Declaring a unilateral peace and just sitting. Just sitting really means that. Just sitting, nothing else. Whatever is, whatever comes forward, however things appear internally, externally, they are seen and met as thus. Sounds very straightforward and very, very simple. Deceptively so, like so extraordinarily simple that we go right past it. Because as human beings, of course, we have an enormous amount, we have a big value system and preference and bias in our experience. The thoughts that come into the mind, the perceptions and the feelings that occur. Typically, as human beings, we're kind of weighing and judging and comparing and contrasting those things, so it's difficult for us to just sit. But that beginning point from the Soto style is, it's said that the Buddha, perhaps it's apocryphal because it's recorded in different traditions, but he said, "Wonder of wonders, I, the great earth, all beings simultaneously attain the way." And in another translation, "I, the great earth, all beings have a wisdom and thusness of the awakened one." Or something like that, right? And so the great declaration there, it's called the Buddha's, the lion's roar, is that all things, all people are intrinsically awake, enlightened, and complete from the very get-go. But then he says, but because of our upside-down thinking, we fail to see it. Because of upside-down thinking, because of the distortion that we introduce, we don't see that inherent enlightened state. We don't see that bottom line. It's covered up, it's obscured. So Soto takes refuge, perhaps, in that original fact of awakening. Now, the Rinzai school I was going to bring up today, which I think, yeah, would be more Tim's school too, comes down through the Rinzai lineage. It says, oh, you're enlightened, are you? Does it feel that way? Do you feel enlightened? You know, to which one we could also say, not really, no. It's like the beginning point is not clear. And there's much more of an emphasis on going toward awakening and breaking through to enlightenment, right? And something that maybe as human beings we're a little more accustomed to, which is we all like a mission. You know, it's like, okay, I'm starting here and I've got to get there. What's the direct route? How do I do it? So a sense of like not beginning in completeness, but rather going toward enlightenment. So two different, the first approach may be a falling back to what is, like maybe more of a breakdown to our original condition. And then the Rinzai school, more of a going forward and a breaking through to discover our deeper, innate, liberated way. And so different approaches. The founder of the Rinzai school was Rinzai, hence the school named after him, right? Who was a Chinese monk and practitioner in the Tang dynasty, who apparently was just extraordinarily energetic and very strident and just one of those people who's just an extraordinary, powerful force of nature. Master Rinzai. It said that when he wasn't like that at the beginning, he had joined a monastic community, the community of Obaku, and he'd been there for 2 or 3 years and he'd never been in to see the teacher. And at that time in China, it was like there were large communities of practitioners. Later in the Tang dynasty, towards the end of the 9th century, there was a real purge of Buddhist monasteries in China. There was like politically fell out of favor. Anything foreign was out, right? There was a real clampdown that came later. But he was there during that period where large communities of monks and nuns. He's living there for a couple of years, and then the head monk who noticed him as somebody maybe who had potential. he said, why don't you go in and see the teacher? Why don't you go in and see Obaku? And he said, I wouldn't know what to say. I don't have a question. And sometimes people will say that, you meet that, like, we'll do retreats and we have meeting one-on-one with a teacher and people say, what do I do? Like, I don't really have a question. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? So, if you're ever in that position, you're in good company with Rinzai. He's like, I wouldn't know what to ask. And so, Bakushu, who's the head monk at that time, says to him, when you go in, just ask him, what is the meaning of Buddhism? What is, good question, right? So he goes in to see Obaku and asks him, what is the meaning of Buddhism? And it said that Obaku strikes him with his stick. Which by we've got to remember a little bit ancient world vibes, right? where it's okay to, that would be like that's this abrupt teaching. It's way too litigious for us to do that here, right? We can't be like smacking people with sticks. But he asks Obaku, what is the meaning of Buddhism? And Obaku strikes him. But apparently if he strikes, we went like Mike Tyson here, this was more like teachers would have a short stick and they would use it, and it's more of an encouragement, like an encouragement. Right? Okay. I'm not making a case for this, I'm just saying how it was. So he asks, what does it mean in Buddhism? And he gets a smack, and so he leaves. And he goes to see Bakushu, and how'd it go? And he's just like, I just got the question out, and immediately hit me. And he said, oh wow, that's strange. He said, okay, try again. You should go back in there, and then just ask him more earnestly, what is the meaning of Buddhism? So he goes back in a second time. Perhaps you can guess what happens. He receives another smack. And he leaves, and he comes back, and wants to leave he's getting a bit riled up. Bakushu says, and there's a weird little cultural element here, where often, if you're really sincere about something, you would ask or do something 3 times. That's an old custom in China at that time. It's like you can't refuse 3 times. Sometimes like an emperor or ruler would ask somebody to take a position as an abbot somewhere, and they'd say no, politely no, I'm too busy, I'm too old, I don't want to go. But you couldn't, if you were asked 3 times, you had to agree on the 3rd time. So there's some cultural stuff here. Bakushu sends him back for the 3rd time, and he asks again, what is the meaning of Buddhism? And he immediately receives another smack. And so he's preparing to leave the temple now. He leaves and he sees Bakushu, I'm going to go. I don't know what I'm doing. I've asked him 3 times and he's hit me. And Bakushu says, oh my God. He says, no, this is unbelievable. He said, you're so wrong, or you're so ungrateful. 3 times you asked Obaku what the meaning of Buddhism is. And 3 times he showed you. And you still don't get it, basically. But it's something along those, and Rinzai, on hearing these words, it says, has a deep insight into what is actually going on. What is actually going on? And he goes back to see the teacher, Obaku, and Obaku sees him come in and picks up his stick, and it said that Rinzai snatches it from him, snatches the stick from him, and says there isn't so much to your dharma teaching after all. And then they kind of laugh about that, and then Rinzai, basically, in short order, becomes a successor. So what is in there in terms of what is realized? What is the meaning of Buddhism? We could go to, Barnes & Noble and go in the religious section and be like, go through and, here's Buddhism, and look at that. And you'll find a lot of books will talk about the meaning of the Dharma, of the meaning of Buddhism. We can listen to a lot of talks or do a lot of retreats. But in Dharma study, we either slowly or quickly come to the realization that it can't be explained in words and given from one person to another. The meaning of that question, what is the meaning of Buddhism? What is the meaning of enlightenment? What is the meaning of this human life? What does it mean to be here as a human being? What does this life mean? What is this mystery that we've all been involved in these many years? If we can stop and we can ponder that for many years, right? And there's all kinds of wonderful philosophies that can be developed and woven around this. It's not to demean those approaches, an intellectual approach or a scientific approach, but the way of Zen that's being talked about here, what I'm bringing up here, is the way of immediacy and direct experience that is before thought comes into the world. What is the meaning? What is this? And in that sense, Obaku showed Rinzai exactly where he lives and what the meaning is. And of course, when we come in and we have these fortuitous conditions, we have these nice circumstances. It's a beautiful day, we have this wonderful space and nice people, right? But then when we sit, that same question is percolating. What is the meaning of Buddhism, of the meaning of this human life, the meaning of this is it now. This is how it is now. It's always this now. And the way of Zen is going beyond thinking it through and trying to find something that we can hang our hat on in terms of meaning. Later on, Rinzai would go on to develop a system that was called the 4 positions of host and guest. So I just wanted to bring those in today. 4 positions of host and guest. So they're quite short. I'm just going to put them out there and maybe share a few words about them and about how this can help with our meditation practice now. The first position is the guest looks at the host. Oh, and I should back up a little bit. The host in this case is the unchanging constancy of awareness or aware experience. This would be the position of the host. Right? So we're all aware here. Right? There is awareness. Everything is aware. Everyone here is aware. That awareness is behind our eyes, fills the room. We can hear and see. There is a constancy of awareness. The quality of that awareness changes depending on our present physical condition, the hour of day and night. But life is constant, or at least up to this point, we've been experiencing that constancy. So the host is involved in the irrevocable thusness of being. Not how this being is currently showing up, but just the fact that life is constantly appearing as thus. This is a position of host. Now, the position of guest is the me-I construction that's also filling that space. Do you have any familiarity with that one? The me-I that is navigating the territory and, compare, again, all of this compare, contrast, thoughts about this and that and about the world and the people in it. That's the guest. The guest isn't always there. There's times when you go to sleep at night, but the guest leaves for the evening. Right? The host is always present, but the guest is coming and going. And if you think of it in that way, of a host and guest, and maybe a guest house in this way, sometimes the person that you are, the guest, changes. You can be many different people, different personalities, different personas, different feelings, different energies, different moods. Sometimes a different person is coming down the stairs in the morning. right? That guest is very changing. I remember doing some like voice dialogue therapy many years ago with Dr. Martha Lou Wolfe, who helped develop that. It's a system of therapy where you go into the different voices inside you, you know, so you'll identify voices like the controller, the caretaker, all of these different, and I realized, wow, and through this I come to real, I'm just like, how many people are in here? I mean, there's primary voices and primary personas, but there's all degrees and shades, and ones, of course, which are, you know, hidden away or more repressed or more, you know, all of these different, those are all of the guests. So that's like host and guest. So you have host, which is the impersonal this of thusness, right? Just being in itself, reality itself, and then the guest. And we're experiencing both. So it's 4 positions. I should get to this, shouldn't I? It's like 4:20 already. Guest looks at the host. The guest, the student, perceives the true self, the host, but still has a separate identity from it. So this is guest looking at host. This is meditation. The guest, that's me, you, I, sits and looks at the host. You see the fullness of life beyond me, I narrative. But it feels a little separate still. It's still me observing. You may be in that position where you are able to sit and then just watch yourself think about things or react to things. But you're not identified with that one. You just watch your own thoughts or watch the way that you react to whatever the present reality is. That is this position of the guest is looking at the host. You see something beyond me, I. That is already a powerful step in Dharma practice. Is even for a moment to escape the constraint of me, I. Because me, I tends to be limited in scope, tends to be narrow. And often that's what brings people to Dharma practice, is the me, I, to live purely in the me, I, is often a dissatisfactory way to live. You know, sometimes it goes right for the me, I for a period of time. Maybe you don't show up for sitting. But over time, you know, we know just we'll live in the difficult, challenging human life. Things don't always work out for me, I. In fact, things never ultimately work out for me, I. Right? So to become aware of the host, this is very important. Right. So I go to the next one. Host looks at guest. So first one was guest looking at host. Being the me, I, seeing the greater self, or host. The second one, host looks at the guest. The enlightened host sees and understands the guest from a place of essential reality. So now this is, you learn to sit or you become awake and you are the guest, you have a host. You are just awareness that is watching the guest carefully and understanding the guest, and you feel even compassionate towards oneself. That's very important. You see how you're always just spinning threads in your mind, worried about this and that. What about tomorrow, next week? What about them? You know. But if you can learn to take refuge as the host, you can even kind of smile, and that's okay, and you can just watch the guest. This is like a more enlightened shift at this point. There's 2 more. Host looks at host. This is a truly enlightened position. The master sees from the perspective of their own fundamental nature and perceives all things as being of the same essence. I really should have put this one last in the way that I found this particular list. I'm going to come back to that one and go to the next one. Guest looks at guest. The state of delusion. This is right, like where we're just seen as separate temporary entities and essential reality is missing. All right, this is interesting because in Buddhism this is seen as being like kind of a deluded position. You're just living in a me, I, self, and so is everybody else, and we're just bouncing off one on another like in a particle accelerator, right? It's just like me and I and the world of me and I, and there's no awakeness there. There's nothing more than just self-centered striving and other self-centered striving, perhaps. That's seen like as being a more of a dark or a more kind of deluded position. In some ways, it's kind of limiting to look at it as deluded or enlightened. You could look at this position of deluded more as a sense of conventional dualistic reality. Everybody's brought up and lives in that, right? We see the world as separate and people as separate, and most things are saying that that's the way that it is. But many wonderful people live wonderful lives in that position and still bring enormous benefit to the world, right? They might never have heard of a dharma or Buddhism. Things might be very dualistic, but that good people doing good things. So it's kind of somewhat pejorative to say, kind of deluded in that sense. The Buddha put it as upside down. Just seeing me, I, and the world of me, I. But it's limiting. That's a limiting position. Retracing to the host seeing the host, the enlightened position is seen much more as being the truly integrated position, right? A position of integration. In the way of Zen or a way of Dharma, we start out as me, I, individualistic, dualistic. That's the beginning point. Through practice and realization, you become aware of what Rinzai calls the host. You become aware of what in Zen is called the absolute or intrinsic. What in Buddhism is called emptiness, ultimately. You become aware of the broader appearance of unchanging, unknowable, ungraspable self. That's what I'm constantly reminding in meditation is take refuge there when you sit. When the bell struck, take refuge in no name, no identity, no problem. Instead of just being in the me, I, sit in the place of non-self, ultimately. They can watch me, I, and everything else occur, but really takes rest there. It's something of a provisional position, because ultimately, it's not that there's something called the host, that there's this enlightened nature, and there's something called the me, I self, which is a deluded nature. It's really one nature. But that integration, the refinement, the integration to bring those two things that seem very different together, for most of us, is the study of a lifetime in Dharma practice. And a few great luminaries bring that together and integrate it in brilliant ways, and then they're able to express that. And they become the great teachers that we have. All of us are involved in that to some degree, whether we use a system like this or not. Right? It's as simple as the me, I identity self is always in attachment and aversion, is always in challenge, is always has a to-do list and difficulty. That's the human condition. We're well used to it in that sense. Dharma practice is not about fixing that one. That one can't be fixed. Ultimately, we'll always have a flaw. that's fine. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't use other modalities and other approaches in order to work with that self. You know, there is a huge role for psychological inquiry, therapeutic inquiry, in order to work on that relative identity self. That is very important. The way of Zen in this way is to see that no matter how well polished or understood that me-I identity becomes, it can't escape suffering. It can't escape the dukkha of the world, right? In order to find liberation and peace from the human condition, we have to transcend the human condition and enter Buddha nature, what's called enter Buddha nature. That's that position much more of host. The nameless, we all have it in common, stillness and presence that is never absent. The more that we can like ground there and find our place there and live there, that's where then the integration of me, I, self with that deeper principle of sameness, fullness and everythingness, that work really starts to get done, and that integration ultimately just goes on endlessly. Even for somebody like the Buddha or Rinzai, who practiced all of those decades and all of those many years, at the end of their lives, they were practicing. Even though they become teachers, they were practitioners first. Always just, always willing to just come back to the very beginning, come back to the simple place, the very beginning, which is this place here. This place here, which can't be understood in words. We can't nail it down and know it and grasp it. But we are it. And through showing up to that, through becoming ever more, we use this like a fancy word like awakening, to be awake. But that literally, you're all awake. Everyone's awake. We're awake. I'm not sure, some of the people on Zoom don't have the camera on, so I don't know if they're awake, like literally, but I'm going to assume they are awake. But everyone's awake, right? We're all here, experiencing this extraordinary mystery, the human life. And we know in this life there is difficulty and dukkha. And the way that we're involved in is how do we reduce that? How do we let go of the things that cause the anxieties, the problems, the difficulties? And how do we learn to take rest in something that is deeper, larger, and much vaster than just a sense of known self? It's like the last thing human beings want to do because we want to know. So to rest in not knowing doesn't come naturally for human beings. That's why we practice the way of the Buddhas.
Hi, I'm Robert Lurie with Long Beach Meditation. Your gracious generosity makes this programming possible. If you found this video to be of value, please consider making a donation here. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this one, click here. And if you want to stay up to date with Long Beach Meditation, click here to subscribe. Thank you.